What would you do if a stranger knocked on your door in the middle of a stormy night, holding a baby soaked to the bone and begging not for money, but for milk? He had nothing left, except the tiny life in his arms. But what he didn't know was that the woman who opened the door had been waiting her whole life for someone just like them. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your story too. Now let's jump into the story. The rain had started just after sunset. A soft, steady drizzle at first, then heavier, tapping against the old windows of the cottage like a quiet song only the night could hear. Inside, Helen Morrow sat in her favorite armchair by the fireplace, the orange glow of the flames reflecting off the teacup in her hand. At 62, Helen had grown used to the silence. Her home, nestled at the edge of a sleepy village, was filled with books, framed photographs, and the faint scent of lavender. Once, her life had been full: students, meetings, laughter in the school hallways. She'd been a school principal for nearly 3 decades, but now her days passed in slow, quiet patterns. Morning walks, gardening, a bit of reading, and evenings by the fire, her gray cat Mossy curled up on the rug, barely stirred as thunder rumbled far in the distance. Helen reached for the remote and lowered the volume of the news. The world outside always felt far away now. War, protests, politics. She had no control over any of it. She sipped her tea, eyes drifting to the photo on the mantel. A much younger Helen stood smiling, arm around her sister, their hair whipping in the wind at a beach long forgotten. Then came the knock. It was soft. One might miss it over the sound of the rain, if not for the stillness of the house. Helen sat up slightly, unsure if she'd imagined it. The knock came again. Just twice, hesitant. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 9:17 p.m., unusual for visitors. In fact, no one had knocked on her door in weeks, maybe longer. With cautious steps, she stood, placed her cup down, and walked to the door. Through the narrow window beside it, she could see the shape of someone, a man, alone in the rain. Helen opened the door just enough to peek through. There he stood, soaked through. His jacket, an old brown one with a ripped shoulder, clung to him from the downpour. In his arms he held something wrapped in a faded pink blanket. "A baby, ma'am," the man said, his voice soft and trembling. "I'm sorry. I saw your lights. I didn't know where else to go." Helen's eyes flicked from his face to the small bundle in his arms. The baby didn't make a sound, but the man shifted her gently, protectively. "We haven't eaten today," he continued, swallowing hard. "My daughter, she's only 3 months. I don't have anything left to feed her." The words hung in the air, heavy and strange in their honesty. He wasn't demanding anything. He wasn't asking for money. He was simply standing there, a stranger in the dark, soaked and exhausted, hoping someone might see him. Helen didn't speak for a moment. She looked into his eyes. There was no trick there. Just worry, pain, and something else: fear. "Come in," she said, opening the door wider. "Quickly, before you both catch cold." The man hesitated, as if unsure whether it was real. Then, with a quiet "thank you," he stepped inside. Warmth greeted them immediately. The crackling fireplace in the next room gave off a gentle heat. The man stood near the entrance, not moving too far in, careful as if afraid to dirty the floor. "What's your name?" Helen asked gently, walking toward a closet to fetch a towel. Nico Ramirez." "And the little one?" "Lena," he said softly. "She's 3 months old. Her mother passed away during the birth." Helen paused. She handed him a towel for himself and reached out, wordlessly, toward the baby. "May I?" she asked. Nico looked down at Lena, then up at Helen. He gave a small nod. Helen took the baby in her arms, feeling the fragile weight of her. Lena's tiny hand peeked from the blanket, curling and uncurling. Her skin was warm but dry. Her little face peaceful but pale. Helen's chest tightened. It had been years, so many years, since she'd held a baby. And yet, it came back to her like breathing. Instinctive, gentle. "She hasn't eaten all day?" Helen asked. "Since yesterday morning," Nico admitted. "I've been walking everywhere, but they asked for papers, IDs, a doctor's note. Things I don't have. I'm not trying to take advantage. I didn't know what else to do." Helen nodded slowly, rocking the baby gently in her arms. "You did the right thing, Nico. You knocked." Lena stirred slightly, letting out a faint, dry cry that barely reached the ceiling. The sound pierced something inside Helen, a space she had kept closed for a long time. "I may be able to help," she said after a long pause. Nico's eyebrows raised slightly. "You don't have to." "I can. I said I may be able to help," she repeated with a soft smile. "Now come closer to the fire. Let's warm you both up." As Nico stepped further into the house, the door closed quietly behind him. The rain outside kept falling, but within the stone walls of the old cottage, something had changed. The silence wasn't so heavy anymore. The soft crackle of the fire was the only sound in the room, aside from the occasional sigh from baby Lena. Now asleep in Helen's arms, Nico sat across from her, still wrapped in the towel she had handed him. He looked around the cozy living room, unsure of where to place his eyes. Everything about the space felt warm, welcoming, but he was a guest, and uninvited at that. A man with empty pockets and a hungry child didn't usually end up in homes like this. Helen watched him quietly over Lena's head. She could see the way his shoulders curled inward, not from cold, but from years of holding everything in. He looked like a man who had forgotten how to rest. "She's peaceful now," Helen said softly, breaking the silence. "She has your eyes." Nico looked up, surprised. Everyone used to say she had her mother's smile. I don't know if she ever got to smile, though. Marin, my partner, she passed right after Lena was born. We didn't even make it out of the hospital. Helen's heart ached for him. She didn't pry further. Some things didn't need deep questions. Sometimes just listening was enough. "You must be exhausted," she said, gently shifting Lena into a small blanket-lined basket near the fire. The baby didn't stir. "I haven't slept properly in a while," Nico admitted. "It's hard when you're always watching over someone." Helen understood that more than he knew. "You hungry?" Nico hesitated, but his stomach answered for him with a soft growl. Helen smiled, standing up. "Come on, I'll fix you something." In the kitchen, she moved with a quiet purpose. She made a bowl of soup and set out a loaf of fresh bread, the kind she baked every Sunday. She watched as Nico ate slowly, politely, almost like he felt guilty for each bite. "You don't have to act like this is a test," she said gently. "It's just food. No one's grading you here." That made Nico chuckle, just a little. "Old habits, I guess. I used to be a woodworker. Ran a small shop. Always had to show I had things under control." Helen sat down across from him, nursing a mug of tea. "And now?" He looked down at the table. "Now I've got a van that barely runs, and a baby I'm scared I can't take care of. I'm not asking for sympathy. My single quotes just ... Talking. You can call me Helen," she said. "And you're doing more than a lot of people would." He looked up. "Doesn't feel like enough." Helen sipped her tea, her eyes far away for a moment. "I spent years running schools, helping kids, giving advice, watching others build families of their own. I always thought my time would come. But time, it doesn't always follow the plans we make." They sat in silence for a moment, not awkward, but quiet in the way people are when they finally feel safe enough to just be. "I didn't expect to be raising a child alone," Nico said, "but she's all I've got. And I'd sleep in the rain every night if that's what she needed." Helen looked over at the basket. Lena's little chest moved gently with each breath. "She won't need to tonight," she said. "Stay, just for now." Nico blinked. unsure if he had heard right. "I couldn't ask you for." "You didn't," Helen said simply. "I'm offering." That night, Helen gave Nico a set of clean, dry clothes her nephew had left behind during a visit years ago. They were a bit loose, but warm. She showed him the guest room upstairs, simple, tidy, with clean sheets and a soft mattress. "This is more than we've had in weeks," Nico said, his voice low. Helen nodded once. "Then it's about time you had it." After she tucked Lena into a borrowed crib beside her own bed, Helen sat for a while watching her sleep. Something in her chest, once quiet and forgotten, was beginning to stir. She hadn't realized how much she missed this kind of presence. The tiny sounds, the soft breathing, the feeling of life in her home again. Down the hall, Nico sat on the edge of the guest bed, staring out the window at the dark trees beyond. For the first time in weeks, the pounding worry in his chest had softened. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, he and his daughter were safe. That was enough. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you," to no one in particular. Back in her room, Helen smiled faintly in the dark. That night, 3 people slept under one roof, each one changed in ways they couldn't yet understand. Rain outside continued softly, but inside, something warmer had taken hold. A shelter. A silence no longer empty, but shared. The morning sun slipped through the curtains in thin golden strips, landing softly on the wooden floors of Helen's home. It was the kind of peaceful morning that often goes unnoticed, birds chirping far away, a pot of tea warming on the stove, and soft footsteps moving down a hallway. Nico stood in the kitchen, awkward but determined. He had found a small toolbox near the back porch and was already tinkering with the squeaky door hinge Helen had meant to fix for months. He hadn't asked, he just needed to do something, anything, to give back. Helen, holding baby Lena in her arms, watched from the other room. She smiled without saying a word. "You're an early riser," she called. Nico looked up, surprised but pleased. "Old habit. I used to open the shop at 6 sharp every day. Still can't seem to sleep in." Helen nodded, walking into the kitchen and laying Lena gently into her small crib. "That hinge has driven me crazy for 2 years." "Well," Nico said with a shy smile, "it's quiet now." From that morning on, a quiet rhythm began to grow between them. It wasn't planned. It just happened. Nico would wake early, make a fresh pot of coffee, and work on small repairs around the house. He fixed the sagging porch step, tightened loose cabinet handles, and even rewired a stubborn hallway light. Each time, Helen would find herself smiling more than she expected. Helen, in turn, cared for Lena with ease that surprised even herself. She knew the feeding times, the little sounds Lena made when she was sleepy, and the way her fingers curled into tiny fists when she was hungry. Her days no longer felt so slow. The rooms of her home, once filled with only books and memories, were now filled with quiet cooes, soft laughter, and new footsteps. In the evenings, they would sit by the fireplace, Helen in her chair, Nico on the edge of the sofa, and Lena nestled between them on a blanket. They didn't always talk, but the silence was no longer cold. It was comforting. One night, as the fire crackled low, Nico turned to Helen. "You've done more for us than I can explain," he said quietly. "I want to help, really help. I don't want to feel like a burden." Helen looked at him for a long moment. "You've never been a burden, Nico, but if you want to feel useful, I may know someone who could use a good woodworker." He raised an eyebrow. "Old friend of mine," she continued, "owns a workshop in town. They build custom furniture. He's always complaining he can't find anyone who actually knows what they're doing." Nico sat up a little straighter. "I could do that. I'd love to do that. I'll make a call," she said, sipping her tea. "But you'll let me handle the references. No one needs to know you've been sleeping in a van." Nico chuckled, the sound soft and honest. "Deal." Days turned into a week. Then another. Nico began working part-time at the woodshop and quickly proved himself to the team. He came home each evening with sawdust in his hair, tired but full of purpose. Lena, now more alert, giggled often and smiled easily. Her cheeks grew rounder, her tiny arms stronger. Helen couldn't help but grow attached. Every sound, every stretch of those tiny limbs pulled her deeper into feelings she had thought were long gone. One quiet afternoon, Helen rocked Lena by the window while Nico repaired a drawer in the next room. The baby had just drifted off, her breathing slow and steady, when Nico spoke without looking up. "You're a natural at this, you know." Helen looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms. "I used to dream of this, holding a child, rocking her to sleep, but life had other plans." Nico set down his tools and walked over, watching them quietly. "I think," he said gently, "that sometimes life makes us wait so we can really see the value of what we've been given." Helen didn't respond right away. She just looked down at Lena, brushing her thumb across the baby's soft forehead. "She's changed everything," she whispered. "You both have." That evening, after dinner, Nico placed an envelope on the kitchen table. Inside was a portion of his first paycheck. "For room and board," he said. "It's only right." Helen pushed the envelope back toward him. "Keep it. Save it for Lena. That's what I'd do if she were mine." There was a silence between them then, but it was thick with something unspoken, not tension. Something warmer. "Okay," Nico said finally, pocketing the envelope. "Thank you, not just for the roof, for everything." Helen only nodded, but her heart felt full in a way it hadn't in years. That night, she wrote in her journal for the first time in months. She didn't write about the weather or her garden. She wrote about laughter, the sound of baby Lena's breath, and how quiet no longer felt empty. Her home, once just a place to sleep and wait, had found its purpose again. She had opened her door to a stranger in the rain. Now, she couldn't imagine it ever closing. The days had grown longer, and the air now carried the soft scent of early spring. The garden outside Helen's home had begun to bloom. Bright crocuses poked through the soil, and birds returned to the trees, their morning songs drifting in through the open windows. Inside the house, life moved at a gentler rhythm than it once had. The quiet was still there, but it had changed. It now held the sound of baby Lena's giggles, the soft clatter of dishes being washed, and Nico's voice humming as he sanded wood in the shed behind the house. Helen sat in her favorite chair, holding Lena, who had just finished a bottle and was drifting to sleep. Her tiny fingers gripped Helen's sweater as if she knew she was safe, and maybe even knew she was loved. Helen looked down at the baby's face, peaceful and perfect. She smiled, but in that smile was a touch of sadness too, because the past was never far away. So many years had passed in quiet longing. She had spent her life building a career, a strong reputation, and a beautiful home. But somewhere along the way, she had let go of the idea that she could still be part of a family. Until now. That evening, Nico came in from the shed, wiping his hands on a towel. His face was tired, but in the best way, like someone who had worked with purpose and come home with something to be proud of. "I made something," he said, placing a small wooden box on the table. Helen looked at it curiously. "What is it?" "Open it," he said. Sitting across from her. Inside was a folded piece of paper. A note. Handwritten, simple and honest. "You gave us shelter, not just from the rain, but from fear. You didn't see a burden. You saw people. You saw us. You gave my daughter a place to grow, and you gave me a place to begin again. You didn't just feed us, you saved us. Thank you for being our light when everything felt dark." Helen read the note slowly, and when she looked up, her eyes were full of quiet tears. "You didn't have to, I did," Nico said gently. "I wanted you to know." She reached across the table and took his hand. No more words were needed. A few days later, Nico received his first full paycheck from the workshop. That evening, he walked into the kitchen with another envelope. This time thicker. For rent, food, all the things you've given us, he said. Helen shook her head. Nico, I told you before. I know, he interrupted. But I want Lena to grow up knowing that we gave back too. That we stood on our own 2 feet. Helen looked at him proud. Not because of the money, but because she understood exactly what he meant. She had spent years teaching children how to grow into kind, strong adults. Now she saw that same lesson unfolding here in real life. All right, she said, taking the envelope. Then this goes into her savings, Nico smiled. Deal. That night, as the fire burned low, Nico sat beside Helen on the sofa. Lena slept peacefully in her basket, and the only sound was the slow ticking of the wall clock. Can I say something? Nico asked. Helen nodded. These past weeks, I've started to feel something I haven't felt since before Marin passed. Helen turned to him. Hope, he said. Peace, maybe even love. He paused. I know it's early. I know everything happened fast. But being here with you, it's felt like home. Helen swallowed softly, her heart steady but full. It's felt like home to me too, Nico continued, his voice careful. I've seen the way you look at Lena. The way she relaxes in your arms. And I've seen the way you care, not because you have to, but because it's in your nature. Helen didn't speak, so he pressed on, gently. I don't know what the future looks like, but I know that I don't want to face it without you in it. You said once that life doesn't always follow the path we expect. Maybe that's true. Maybe sometimes it brings you exactly what you need when you least expect it. Helen reached over and touched his hand. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I thought I had missed my chance. I thought my time had passed. But then, you knocked. They sat together in silence for a long while, letting the moment settle, letting the quiet speak for them. Years later, the garden behind the old stone house would be full of flowers and laughter. Little Lena, now with scraped knees and wild curls, would run through the grass while Nico built her a treehouse. Helen would sit beneath the trees, reading aloud from her favorite storybook, her voice strong and kind. Visitors would often say the house felt special, like love lived in its walls, and maybe it did, because Helen had once opened her door expecting nothing. What she received instead was everything. Sometimes, life gives you rain. But sometimes, if you're lucky, it sends someone who needs you just as much as you need them. And that kind of love? That's the kind that lasts forever.